So I am joined today by Naomi Stone, who is a psychologist, HR manager, public speaker on organizational culture, and very much, as we're going to hear, into well-being, leadership, and engagement at all levels of kind of human connection, I guess, within businesses and organizations. I'm not going to steal Naomi's thunder because I want to hear a little bit more from Naomi in terms of how she sees very much her role in life, I guess, in sort of organizational life. But as a qualified psychologist, she's very, very well qualified to talk to us today about the impact of nature on well-being. So we're going to explore that in a little bit of depth, we hope. And over to you, Naomi, just to give a little bit of background to everybody listening in terms of really kind of obviously where you've come from, but also some of the kind of little things that certainly have resonated with me when I've listened to you talk, because you talk about some really, really interesting concepts, including biophilia, which was a new one on me, which I want to kind of delve quite deeply into in this little conversation. So give the listeners a little bit of a background as to kind of who you are, kind of almost really what sort of got you to where you are today.
Hey, oh, thank you, Neil. So lovely to be here. So I look after wellbeing and engagement for an organisation that I work for at the moment. They're a care charity, sort of retirement village care charity in Bristol. So my role there is, so that the title is colleague engagement manager, but I feel like that doesn't really say enough. I do more than that. I'm more about sort of the kind of intrinsic nature of engagement. So not about what you get from work, what you get paid, which obviously is completely important, and what you receive. It's about how you feel and what you go home and tell your partner or whoever's at home when you finish your day's work. You know, how does it make you feel? So in terms of biophilia, I ought to say I'm not a chartered psychologist, but I'm a psychologist in research. So I got my master's in occupational psychology only about, 6 or so years ago now. And I think that really gave me the opportunity to study, firstly, obviously, behaviour in the workplace, which is fascinating, isn't it? Because we're all quite different. People are quite different in workplaces and behave in different ways. And but also it gave me the chance to extend my thinking around biophilia and well-being. So I'm interested to hear that biophilia was new to you. Was it last week?
It was. It was a term, and I mean, I guess I can sort of work it out from the the nature of the word, but it wasn't something. Having spent obviously quite a bit of time researching and being part of organisations passionate about well-being, but it wasn't really something that had ever really sort of come onto my radar. So when I heard this, it was like, oh, hold on, this is new. And then, of course, you'd hooked me in, and I was listening quite intently.
Yeah, so biophilia means, translated is love of life and living things. And when you hear a philia, normally they're not very nice things, are they? But biophilia is a nice thing. So it's about the love of living and life. And it was a term that was kind of brought to prominence. It wasn't coined by him, but E.O. Wilson, who's fascinating. And I really encourage you to read some of his work. Sadly, he passed away last month. In December, and so it's actually quite easy to find sort of obituaries and information about him. But he came up with this idea with Stephen Kellett of the biophilia hypothesis, which suggests, and it sounds absolutely sensible, suggests that human nature depends on our connection to nature because we're from nature, and our kind of Stone Age brains live and work in the land. And in a way, if you think about it, it's only been the last 200 years in industrial revolution that we've started to live like we do, which is more and more separated from the earth and your hands in the soil and being part of nature and seasons and that sort of thing. So I was really fascinated by that. And it's, once you start scratching the surface of what does nature do for us? My goodness, there's a whole world of research and knowledge out there about how psychologically spending time in nature is simply good for us. and on so many different levels. I
think a lot of people would kind of recognize with that, probably if they choose to spend just a moment thinking, how would that feel for me? Well, yes, it's obvious, isn't it? And yet so few of us actually do it on a regular and consistent basis. It's kind of not part of what might be described as, and I've been exploring and playing with this word, busy lifestyle. So the busy lifestyle of today doesn't necessarily equate with allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to take that time out. But from what you're saying, it's absolutely essential for well-being.
Yeah, that's it. And it's not just about having time out. It's not, we know that having a break is good for us. Again, there's evidence to suggest that, of course, it's not sustainable to just plow on through. But having a break in a natural environment, or at least having a view of a natural environment, is quite interesting. Even a view of a garden or some authentic greenery is better for you than simply having a break. Do you see what I mean? So it is. And I think it's true, we are living really busy. It's just the catchphrase, isn't it? It's the everything. Everybody's so busy. And I think that's part of our problem, really, is that we forget what we need.
So do you think it's with something like that then? Do you think it's because, I guess maybe since the 90s, and it's probably 3 decades now of almost celebrating being the busiest, being the last to leave work, being, the one with the most hectic diary that nobody can book in with, being that person who's kind of racing around the office or, always fully booked. It's almost celebrating that rather than actually celebrating the person who is, at one with their environment, is actually able to make time, is actually able to take a lunch break and go and meditate in a field or a park, or literally just sort of get out and actually celebrating that is a good thing, rather than, oh, look at that person, they're just constantly running. Isn't that amazing? Do you think we've got it fundamentally wrong?
I do. And I think that's it. We do. Maybe things are changing. I think there is a little bit of a whiff of change in the air, which is great and fascinating, and it'll be interesting to see what we do with that going forward. But you're right, there is a sense of, she's superwoman, she gets everything done, or he's just, he's non-stop, and we celebrate it. And actually in some ways, a bit like, I love Alain de Botton, who says, you should pity the rich people. And it's a bit like, maybe we should pity the people who are just working non-stop and have a million things in their lives, actually, because they need a break. They need time out. How authentic are they being to their true selves? I think
is it a thing about time then? Is it that, for that authenticity and being true to yourself, I mean, you have to kind of give yourself permission to take that break or to take that moment? Because I certainly am. This is one of the big things for my journey this year, which I'm talking a lot about, kind of awareness and abundance. So being just aware of the things that should, would be beneficial to be part of your world this year, and then creating abundance from those things. So if you identify there's something that's working really well, that's really, really good for you, is not to sort of say, well, I'll just do it as a treat, but actually say, no, that's a priority. I need more of that. So is this kind of falling in line with that, where it would be that, okay, the first thing you might do at the beginning of the week, rather than just jumping straight into your email inbox, would actually spend a little bit of time just looking out, as you say, out of the window at the tree outside and thinking, okay, it's midwinter, but look, there's buds. And actually kind of, just literally becoming one with the environment, rather than just jumping into the sort of the hamster wheel, which I'm kind of seeing a lot of people doing this year. At the start of this year, is almost like they're jumping onto that kind of, it's the new year, it's the next opportunity, I've got my New Year's resolutions, let's race. As opposed to, I think maybe what you're starting to talk about here is, no, this is not a race. This is about celebrating the moment and actually, embracing, and as you say, coming back to being the one with nature that we all probably, were meant to be.
I think that's it. And I think perhaps you're in a privileged position if you do have that choice to say, instead of getting my laptop up or jumping in the car, I'm going to go for a walk, because so many people don't have that luxury. And I think that's the bit that I'm trying to challenge, is I don't know, people's lives are set up in a way that even if they may not even want to be living in this way, where they get up immediately, sorting the kids out, the dog for a walk, it's like one thing after another, then racing to work, doing your day's work, then picking the kids up, then making tea, then taking them off to after school club. I don't have children, by the way, so I see this through a different lens, but it is how it works. Yes. And I sometimes do feel like, it's all right for me to say that I don't have children, and I can, I can go for a walk in the morning, or I can. But I think this is why I feel strongly that institutions and workplaces and society as a whole need to break this idea about busyness, exactly what you're saying, this status thing about being busy and getting so much done. So, because some people just don't have a choice. So let's encourage the elements of biophilia, whatever that means to different people. Biophilia, by the way, when I talk about it, means being out in nature, looking at nature. And of course, we've got completely authentic nature, like seasides and gorges and ravines. And then we've got artificial nature or man-made nature, like gardens and parks. They're all fine. The more authentic, the better, which fits with the biophilia hypothesis, which suggests that we, as humans, we prefer a kind of savanna view, or the view that our ancestors would have had. But biophilia also means bringing elements of nature indoors. So things like natural airflow, greenery, having plants, real plants if you can. I know some workplaces are funny about that, but real plants, mimicry of nature in shapes, and, which is quite apt at the moment. You walk around IKEA and it's like being out in some sort of garden, because everything's like, it's a bit trendy, and that's another danger, is that we go down the kind of, it's a trend thing, and it's it's deeper than that. But yeah, I think we need to just start as a society and workplaces embedding what it means to be human in our work, into our lives, so that people have the opportunities. So if you have a break, you don't just sit downstairs in a staff room looking at your phone. You have the option of being outside, or maybe undercover, but creating spaces where people can be still quite warm, but be outside and be, connecting with nature, or, there's so many different ways, aren't there? Like meetings and, walking meetings and allotment clubs and things like that. But it's got to be part of our culture, hasn't it?
It has, and I think it is that whole thing when you say about trends. I think it is quite interesting. It's almost, where does the trend begin? Does the trend begin because somebody, you could call them an influencer of sorts, says, right, this is a good thing to do, and then everybody just chases and runs after that? Or is it that there's just this society or community need because you've gone beyond the tipping point? To me, it feels a little bit more like, I think for lots of us, particularly after the last 2 years, we've kind of hit that tipping point where it's like, we don't want to actually go back to the way that it was. This is now a little pivotal moment where, if I'm never going to do it, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So why not? Let's just do it. We moved house from the centre of town out into the countryside, right in the middle of the lockdown, because it was one of those things you could still do. You could still move house whilst we were locked down here in the UK. And so we did that, and we honestly have never looked back. We're both, my wife and I were brought up in the countryside, so it's very much home to us. Time in an urban environment, we kind of almost felt that longing to go back. It happened a little bit faster than we were expecting, but now here we are back in the countryside. So we are so grateful for being here, and every day being able to look at that savanna view that you describe it, wall to wall sort of view. We're up on a hill, we can see virtually the whole of Somerset from where we are. It's just incredible, and we're so incredibly grateful every single morning when we look at it. It's like, wow, look, there it is again. But I think what you're saying is it doesn't have to be like that. There is this little kind of almost microcosm you can create around you that allows you to almost, as you say, and I want to sort of delve into this a little bit, it almost kind of sort of mimic real nature, and it's kind of okay. So if you're in city centre, if you're in a very urban office, if you're kind of not surrounded by lots of greenery that, you know, I'm very fortunate enough to be, you can still do this stuff. You can still kind of create a desk environment, or you can create something within the space that you're in that kind of almost sort of mimics the best bits of that. How does somebody begin with that? Is it like having a desktop background of a forest? I mean, is that kind of like a basic sort of starting point? Does that work?
Yeah, it does. It, you know, even looking, and there's a very recent study using virtual reality, so you literally, you know, sitting still in the same spots and, you know, looking at nature and exploring through the lens of virtual reality, which sounds brilliant. But yeah, there was evidence to suggest that that is also, you know, has a powerful well-being effect on people. And I think that's great for people who are stuck in hospital or housebound, or, you know, there's lots of different reasons why that could be fantastic. But also, you know, again, it goes back to, as I said, the more authentic, the better. And I think schools are doing this pretty well. City schools are encouraging kids to go out and have a maths lesson outside. Very basic example, counting trees, or, you know, like, you know, using the lesson bit as part of what's around you. And I love that idea. And I think in the workplace, we could do that. So I work for a caring organisation. But unless you're delivering personal care, why can't some of that care be outside, or in, I mean, in one of our homes, we've created an indoor garden, which is fantastic, or, you know, sensory gardens, things like that. So it's bringing those sorts of things into workplaces as the norm, and also not frowning on people taking a break within that environment. So I did a study with indoor workers where I found that, as you would expect, to match the biophilia hypothesis, people felt better when they spent 10 minutes outside during the working day than 10 minutes inside, still having a rest, but inside, in fact, doing a nature themed activity, but indoors. So that they had higher, people who went outdoors had better positive affects or positive mood, lower negative mood, but also though the positive mood linked to job satisfaction. So there was a correlation there between having positive effects during the day in nature actually enhanced your experience of work overall. So really good reasons. But one of the downsides to the study, which was fascinating, was in a qualitative couple of questions, people told me that they felt guilty about going outside, even just for 10 minutes, putting their coat on and going out for a walk. And that made me feel really sad, but also highlighted a point that this is the cultural norm that we should be doing. So yes, bring nature in, bring plants in, have pictures up of nature. That will all help. But actually, we know that breaks are good for you as well. But, you know, just encouraging, having meetings outdoors, delivering care outdoors, going back to that thing, unless you're delivering, I don't know, you can just do things a bit differently and have a bit more freedom in your working life, whatever job you do. You know,
that's a fascinating thing when you say about the feeling guilty. Now I'm in a very, again, very, very, and I understand it and I reflect on this, very privileged position that I can kind of control my time. So I have clients, I have, you know, people I mentor. So there is a diary involved and it's a very full diary. And yet I can control where I do most of that. So I'm very, very fortunate in that regard. But, and here's the big but, and it is a big but, if I choose to have a planning session or maybe write a report or something like that, and I decide I'm going to go, and I've done this because I've experimented, I'm going to go and do this on a hillside. I'm going to go and take all my stuff because I am a remote worker, so I can take literally everything I need in a backpack and literally sit on a hillside, sun's going, and I can set up my office literally on the grass on a hillside. And I've done this.
Have you?
And yet, when I'm doing
Neil.
that, even though I'm being completely productive
Yeah.
and I'm connected because I'm in mobile coverage and everything, I still feel, even though it's my responsibility that I'm making that call, I still feel a little sort of pang of guilt that, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Why is that?
I know.
It's
is it
just
real work?
fundamentally not right, is it?
I know.
But we do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. People feel bad about it. Like, yeah, but actually, evidence tells us that you will be more productive. You'll have better cognition, better memory, from being in that environment. So actually you're delivering probably much better quality work. It'd be interesting, wouldn't it, to see if you could compare that. And yet you still feel guilty. I find that fascinating, because it's not the norm, I suppose, isn't it?
No. And another thing I tried as well, and this was one actually, I took a photo on the iPhone, popped it onto social media, and it was actually, this was 2 years ago, sitting up on the Downs in Bristol, which for those of, a lot of people won't know the Downs, but it's a very, very large open public space right in the centre of Bristol in the UK, and very popular for kind of doing outside sports and walking and flying kites and everything. There's big music events up there, but it's a very, very big open space. And I would take a garden chair and I would sit right in the centre of the Downs. So literally no trees around me, nothing. So I'm right out in an open space. And I would set up my little work centre. So I'd have my laptop on my lap, and I'd have my phone by my side, and I'd be working right in the centre of a huge, great open space. The curious looks and people raising their eyebrows like, what is he doing? As people would walk past. It's so alien, I think. It's like, look, you're doing office stuff. Shouldn't you be in the office? How are we going to get away from this mindset? I mean, I put this onto social media and I had so many likes. People said, oh, I'd love to be doing that. And I was thinking, so why aren't you doing that?
Yes, exactly.
How are we going to kind of break this? I'm not expecting us to kind of crack it in this conversation necessarily, but how are we going to break this mold? Because it felt so good to be doing that. And it was fun. And I was still productive. I was getting a nice tan. It was a beautiful day. Why wouldn't people want to be doing this collectively? Because they don't, do they?
I think role modeling it sounds a bit obvious, doesn't it? But you do it, keep doing it and sharing it. And I'll do the same. And hopefully people listening will do that as well, and not feel alone, because we start to create a bit of a norm. I quite strongly believe in the kind of groundswell of change. So you start kind of, you don't have to be, people often say, oh, it's got to start at the top, Yeah, I agree in a lot of cases, culture change and has to be role modeled from people at the top. But actually, if people at any level of an organization can just create a bit of change and create a norm and say, oh, I'm going to go for a walk. I've done it in my office when we used to work in the office. Should we go for a walk? And you get a little group of people around, you just start to create a culture. So I'm hoping that there are leaders and managers who are listening and can feel inspired to do that, because it's not, and not feel bad about it, because actually it's counterproductive not doing that. So see it as the other way round, switch it up a bit. And even if you work in, we have people working in a laundry, which is quite hard to leave, when you're busy, but you still get a break. So the manager could say, why don't you take your cup of tea outside, take this chair, fold up chair with you, or I don't know, you just generate it, make it a norm, and it'll be a slow little uptake, but then it will become something that's a bit more normal to do.
And I guess it's probably, and we talked a little bit earlier about this whole thing about, is this the moment? Is this the time where it becomes more acceptable to be able to do it at all kind of stratas of an organization? Is it, I wonder, and this is a reflective question really, is it, I wonder, now is a more acceptable time to do it because the working from home thing, particularly in the UK, and I'm sure this applies, all over the world, the working from home thing is now a little more accessible. It's not completely, we've had some political announcements in the last sort of couple of weeks about return to the office, return back into work. And I think certainly from my very, very low level of research on this, I do tend to ask if you're still blended working, are you still working from home? Feels like now is a time where, look, if we're going to do this thing, now is the time to almost stand your ground and say, look, I've been super productive over the last year or so, doing this working from home and being more flexible as to where I produce what I produce.
Yeah.
Surely now, this is the time to say, look, here's the evidence. I mean, is there specific evidence that you're aware of that kind of really backs this up? Because, we're feeling this, aren't we? We're feeling that this is a good thing to do. I mean, are other organizations really kind of doing this properly now?
Yeah, I mean, there was early talk, wasn't there, about organizations getting rid of their office space. So this would become a norm. I don't know how much of that has come true, but that certainly was something that McKinsey was reporting, that I think it was like 30% of organizations were going to lose quite a lot of office space. However, this is, I think you're right in terms of timing, great timing for that change. Also, we must keep in mind climate change, which people are thankfully becoming more and more aware of and taking more notice of. And I think, there's evidence to suggest that the more time you spend in nature, which is what we've all done in lockdown and during the last 2 years, we've sort of been exploring our natural and local spaces a bit more. And the evidence tells us that the more you experience nature, the more inclined you are to have pro-environmental behaviours, particularly in children. So I think there might be something there about a change. People are starting to think a bit differently. Why do I need to get in my car and drive to an office or whatever, however you get there, and do the same work? It doesn't make sense. But interestingly, see, this is again a cultural thing. A friend of mine who works in central Bristol has just had to put in a flexible working request to continue working from home for 1 or 2 days a week, despite the fact that she's been doing it during this whole couple of years. And she's having a real challenge. I mean, she thinks she will get it in the end, but the fact she's had to formalise that, she has to travel into Bristol every day. There's so many reasons why that's not really always working for her. So there's still a long way to go. So whilst, yes, this is the time that it's in the air, people are feeling it, they want to change, but equally we've still got these old-fashioned cultures, I suppose, where that's not as easy for some people. And I suppose, I
was going to say, one of the things that I guess is quite empowering is knowing that even if it isn't a sort of a fundamental shift to your way of working as an organization, as an individual, there are little things. I mean, from what I'm sort of picking up from what you're saying, Naomi, is that there's a few little things that you can do at a very kind of personal level to just make this happen. And probably one of the things is to kind of literally, wherever you happen to be listening to this or watching this, is if you look around you, what do you see? How much nature do you have in your very local situation? So if you're in an office, what have you got around you? What nature is here? Is it the pot plant? Is it the view from the window? Yes or no? Kind of, would people generally sort of do best to start at things that they can control? Because that would feel like a natural and obvious starting point, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So bring plant in from home, or even if you've got a very small sort of inner city office space, you can have greenery in very small spaces. I love the ideas, you see them around the upright what do you call them, pallets with plants growing out, so almost like a living wall but in a pallet. I mean, how it looks fantastic and fairly straightforward to do. So you can do something quite creative with small spaces and inner city spaces. Normalize it, role model it. Remember that people, it's interesting what you said about moving back to the countryside, that it was almost like calling you back, wasn't it? But so many of us, and I'm one of these people, I'm a real city girl. I grew up in Cardiff, in inner city Cardiff. And it was only really when I met my husband at university. He grew up in Greater Manchester, and his life was very much outdoors. He knew the names of birds and trees and fish and stuff. I didn't really have a clue. I was a bit, and it was only through his eyes that I started to notice things in nature. And I think that's important, that so many people, you don't necessarily feel that nature's for you. It doesn't, or it doesn't factor as part of your life, if you know what I mean. I didn't grow up, I've only sat on a horse twice in my life. do you know what I mean? It's sort of, so it's something that I've grown into and learned, and now I'm studying the psychological effects of that, having experienced it myself. And so I think this, workplaces, schools, colleges, even hospitals could be people's entry into understanding nature, or witnessing things grow, or nurturing a plant, or, do you know what I mean? I don't mean that to sound patronizing, because I'm genuinely talking about my life as well, So
yeah, I think there's a really key word you said there was witnessing it, because I think it's all very well for Naomi and Neil to be sort of, sat here talking about this, and it's like, oh yes, well, listen to you, you've got all the time in the world to be thinking about it. We don't. We are also, fully kind of booked, and we've got loads of stuff going on and things like that. But I think to lots of people, it is about just witnessing it, not necessarily overthinking bringing this into their world, but actually just feeling what it's like. So your recommendation there to just bring a pot plant in and just put it on your desk, and not just sort of thinking, oh, that looks nice, but actually feeling the difference that makes. It's like, a little bit of greenness right next to me, and it's always there. It becomes like a little green pot plant friend kind of thing. That's it. And so it's kind of being really, really aware of the difference that's making. So maybe even if it is just turning your desk around so you're kind of facing in a slightly different, so you get a little bit more of that view of that tree in the distance over there, and kind of how does that feel? So maybe not just overthinking the effects it's having, but just being in the moment to just think, actually that feels quite nice. So maybe this is more about the heart than it is about the head, possibly, for people. Would you think?
Yeah, absolutely. One time we worked in an office when we were all in the office in my workplace. We had skylights, so we couldn't see outside. So we brought in not only plants, we all brought in some plants, but we also started bringing in pictures. A colleague of mine, bless him, he made a little collage of people's holiday pictures of greenery and nature. So we had it on these metal, you can imagine, can't you, metal filing cabinets, but covered in these lovely pictures of outdoors or people's dogs, or so yeah, it's just, and it feels, whenever I ask people, where's your favorite place, they do always say, there's only one person who's ever said the pub. That's fine, no judgment there, but most people will say a natural space. It makes you feel good, and again, tons of evidence to suggest that people feel significantly happier and more fulfilled in a natural or green space, or looking at a green space, than they do in an all urban space. But cities can do this well. London's actually quite, in fact, Bristol, London, Singapore, fantastic. They're pretty good biophilic cities, actually. They've done a good job of mixing the urban with the greenery. Bristol's full of little city parks, isn't it?
Very interesting what you say there about the the key, I guess the sort of the key point is like, where's your favorite place? And just that snapshot answer. So everybody listening to this now, I want you to answer Naomi's question. Where's your favorite place? And don't overthink it. Don't think, well, it could be there, or this year it was here, and this year. You're overthinking it. Just go with the heart. Where's your favorite place? And let's see if collectively, and if you do have the opportunity, depending on where you're listening or watching this, to put your answer actually in the message thread below, that would be very interesting, so that we can actually see whether or not Naomi's theory is correct. And I have a sneaky feeling it's going to be correct. The fact is that it is probably an outside kind of place that you're talking about, or it probably is outside in a place that you're talking about. So if it's a city, it's probably somewhere outside in that city rather than in the pub, like you say, that one example, which is hilarious. So that in itself probably is a great steer, that innately we're all kind of feeling this thing, as long as we're just waking up and just being a little bit more aware and a little bit more grateful for just those little snapshots in time. That's really, really interesting, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I like that question, I think, because that, to me, that's part of this whole evidence that it's got to be a good thing to do. One thing I did want to ask you is, we talk a lot about green space, because that is, I think, something that a lot of us have started to use as almost a phrase. When we're thinking of this kind of this nature thing, does it have to be green? I mean, a lot of people obviously listening to this are not going to be based, say, in the UK, which is traditionally very green because of the amount of rain that we get. Mm-hmm. But if you're listening to this in somewhere like, say, Arizona, or if you're in Cairo or somewhere like that, where green is not the color that you see, is it green? Is a magic color, or is it a kind of other color that can actually work in this regard?
That's really interesting, isn't it? And I haven't looked at the research on that. So all the research is about greenery and forests or nature, and you're right, that comes with a certain climate, doesn't it? I would suggest, though, in line with the biophilia hypothesis, that it's what is innate, your ancestors or to previous generations. So if you've grown up somewhere in the desert, maybe that is the place that is where your heart is and and it's still natural, isn't it? So I think that maybe the answer is it's a natural space as opposed to necessarily a green space with elements of nature in it.
So if you've grown up in some sort of coastal community, it could be the blue of the sea,
coastal communities.
It could be yellow of the desert, it could be green of the forest, like you say,
absolutely.
Or maybe even the white and the grey of the mountains if you've grown up in a mountainous area.
Yeah.
So, as you say, this is really interesting because I'm trying to kind of figure out ways that, well, I can do this, but obviously other people can start on this journey of kind of exploring what is the most relevant thing. Because yes, it could be the simple pot plant on the desk, but it could also be, as you say, this great big visual sort of thing of where your heart is. And if your heart is in the desert, get a great big canvas for the wall, in front of you. So you've always got it there. If it is at the sea, maybe get in a little aquarium, get some little fish in an aquarium,
Yes.
It could be all of these things, couldn't it?
Absolutely. I've really thought about that, having an office aquarium or fish tank, as long as they're, somebody takes good care of them. But yeah, so I love that idea. But I think the key word is restoration. What we need as humans is time for restoration. And very closely linked to the biophilia hypothesis is the attention restoration theory. And which says exactly what we've been talking about, really. Just a period of time looking out or spending time in nature is restorative for us. And is a good thing, and we need to be doing it more rather than rushing from one thing to the next. And I think particularly important in the winter, in British winters, we get quite long, feels like a very long winter, doesn't it? But also the darkness. And I think during a working day, some people must never see daylight. In fact, we know there's some research that says it's something like 66% of people work with no natural light. So in the winter, you're not seeing natural daylight. That's quite worrying, isn't it? So in that case, I would bring in those daylight bulbs. I would encourage people to take breaks outside. You think more and more people are working in industrial units and warehouses and distribution centres, and that's really crucial. Get some nature in your life, really. Yeah.
Wow. Do you know what I want to do now? I just want to go for a walk. I want to get out there.
Well,
and hopefully lots of others will be thinking the same.
I hope so, yeah. And so many of us, many of people listening, I'm sure, will be living in cities, because more and more of us are living in urban environments and migrating to cities, and cities are growing out and, if anything, taking up our nature, expanding up, taking our, taking sort of areas of land. And that, I think the whole thing around biophilia and well-being, whether that's at work or just in your life, is more important than ever. It's about bridging that gap between how we should be living as humans and experience things as humans, and the way we're living, which is sometimes quite remote, isn't it? Quite far removed from what we really need. Yeah.
It's been fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Naomi, for your kind of guidance and wisdom and all the ideas. I mean, I think, for me, it's just I think the big summary for me is the fact that this is in my control. I can do this. If I want the pot plant on the table, I can do that. If I want to put a little picture up, even if it is on the desktop, of your computer, it's a starting point. It's about taking that ownership. I might not have complete control over, everything I'm doing, particularly at work, as we've been focusing very much on kind of work time here. I might not have the full control over my calendar. I might be told what to do and where to be all the time, but it's those little moments, and it's just appreciating those little moments and maybe gathering evidence of productivity and effectiveness when you either have done that and you come back in all refreshed and raring to go, or when you're actually working in nature and you bring back the impression of what you've actually created, and people say, wow, so it is possible. So I think it's all about evidence, isn't it? Which is what you've told me here. So I think as long as people are very much awake and aware of all the little effects and actually go with the heart, how's this stuff feeling, rather than just overthinking it, try it, see how it feels, then that's got to be the way forward, isn't it?
Yeah, and then role model it and make it the norm. Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much, Neil.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sort of coming on to this this particular episode. I think we needed it. I think as you say, this is a British winter. Obviously, not everybody listening to this is in winter. You might be in the summer right now, but I think for us in the British winter, typically this is a good time to kind of really celebrate that it is just those little moments. Yeah, you don't have to spend all day outside, but just make sure you get at least some daylight and some nature in whatever form that is for you. So thank you so much, Naomi. And yes, I wish you all the very best in your exploration of this this journey further. And yes, do share any more evidence that you have obviously with us, because I guess the more that we can have to back up this as being a good thing, the better, really.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Neil. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.